All right. So, um, okay. So, as you can see, this is a cybersecurity awareness kind of training given by spriteCloud. Um Basically, the first part is I want to clarify for a lot of people kind of the need for awareness training. Obviously, in our organization, we have a lot of people who are quite technically minded, but not everyone maybe has necessarily the understanding of kind of the threats out there on a security level. Um, so kind of the main reason kind of behind all this, which I think we're all aware of, is that cyber attacks are becoming more common. I think no one is a stranger to this fact or the fact that there are constantly, or not constantly, but more often we see reports of cyber breaches and cyber attacks, and that they are increasing in frequency. But we also have to remember that in the EU we have what's called the GDPR kind of rule, a regulation. That's the R stands for regulation, which forces business to disclose any data leaks or security breaches, or else they risk fine. So while this graph you see here is from 2011 to 2018, we can already see a trend of nearly a 5-fold increase in disclosures of security breaches. GDPR went into effect in 2018, so while I don't have the figures at hand, I do know that the increases in cyber attacks have increased since then, especially with the coronavirus. There's been a lot more risk, which we'll get into later, but a lot more cybersecurity attacks and attempts as well. Another reason why cybersecurity training is important is that basically small to medium-sized businesses are being attacked more often. So in 2015, which you can see in the graph there was a steady increase from 2011 to 2015. But in 2015, there are about 43% of cyber attacks were targeting small businesses, small to medium businesses. In 2020, this increased to 63%. Actually, for those businesses that were attacked, the costs were quite dear in the sense that on average, recovery costs were around about $200,000, which for a small business is quite a large amount of money. And actually, about half the small businesses that were breached typically shut down within 6 months of a breach. So as you can imagine, for these smaller organizations, cyber attacks are quite dangerous. So it's actually pretty important to improve security, because a lot of smaller organizations who maybe are a bit less technically minded and behind the times, they have the mindset of we're too small to be of value for someone to hack. Now, that unfortunately does not kind of hold true anymore. Small businesses are great targets for low effort ransomware attacks, where hackers lock a system down and then they demand ransomware to unlock the system for the owners of it. And actually, in recent years, this has become the major style of attack because it is more common, making it more common. And the reasons for that are what's called SQL injections, phishing, and more targeted spear phishing has been more effective at basically getting access to systems which allow hackers or cyber criminals to install malware or what's called ransomware, which basically encrypts the data and allows no one else to access it. Then basically they say, pay me $100,000 and I'll give you the key to unlock it. And a lot of businesses are literally kind of stuck and can't do anything without their data. So this could be clients' data or intellectual property, those kind of things. Another important reason is our lives are becoming more digital. So obviously, as you can see in 2020, most of us were forced to start working digitally. spriteCloud particularly, unless you're at the client and they have specific circumstances, I would say 80% of us are working from home all the time. But here around the world, there's obviously different numbers. Netherlands has been working quite remotely a lot since March, I'd say. Other countries, a bit different. But basically, more companies are using the internet, even ones that are less traditionally more digitally minded. And basically, people are using the internet more often in their private lives. So as we become more digital, we also then have a greater attack surface, both for companies and for private people in our private lives. So there's more opportunity for people to attack this because we have more accounts, we have more websites we use often, we have basically just more time spent in an area where cyber attack is possible. And actually, the most important thing around this cybersecurity awareness training is the fact that human error is responsible for many breaches. So there is some debate regarding the percentage of cyber attacks caused by human error. Often it's cited as being between roughly 28% and as high as 90%. The reason for this is it's kind of difficult to say, phishing, what causes different things. It's not so always clear how exactly things are done. But regardless of the number, it is a significant enough number to warrant organizations to improve awareness on cybersecurity. And it's also because a lot of people in organizations, and even within similar departments, have different levels of technical competency and are able to understand the risk of their behavior. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of you people that I'm speaking to right now in spriteCloud have a greater technical understanding than I would, or Baruch would have, potentially, or Patricia, who work in not technical roles. But even within the testing departments, there are people who maybe don't understand necessarily as much the security risks associated with their behavior and how they use their user accounts. So that brings us to the next part, chapter 2, where we talk about password security. Now, it's important to understand, and I'll mention this later, this cybersecurity awareness thing will be kind of a longer term thing. I will occasionally do more Sprite Talks where we talk about this, and I'll break it down into several chapters. I have potentially 11 on my outline of what to do, and I will probably cover 2 or so per Sprite Talk. But this will be the introduction that we just went through in chapter 1, and chapter 2 will be covered this this talk, and next time you can join us for other ones in the future. But we'll go into probably the most crucial part, password security. We'll focus on passwords first because we all use them, and we all have a lot of them. And actually, passwords can actually create a false sense of security. Because we think, it's a password, who's going to guess my password? It's quite difficult. But having a password alone is not the whole equation. How we use them also really affects how actually useful they are. So actually fixing our password behavior can provide a huge improvement to overall security. So as you can see here, we have some of the top 30 most used passwords in the world. You'd be surprised how many people use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and a password as a password, but it does happen a lot. And actually, when hackers are actively using kind of brute force approaches where they just quickly guess passwords using automated methods, they will use these and variations of these passwords to quickly figure them out because they are the mostly used. So if you do see one of your passwords on this list, I would highly recommend that you change it immediately. If you have one, and right now I would maybe even leave this presentation and go do it. But anyways, the problem with passwords is that we need to remember them, and it's actually easier to remember simple things like password 1 than it is to remember a random string of letters and numbers and characters, which are actually more secure. So that's the kind of the fundamental flaw with passwords and how we use them, and it's something we'll kind of bring back later as we go throughout this talk. Now the problem is, we need to remember our passwords, and because of that, we use easy to remember passwords, and we use them over and over and over again. So the reason why this is a problem is something that cyber criminals use, a process they do, and it's called credential stuffing. So basically what they do is that they take stolen lists of usernames and passwords to gain access through large-scale automated login requests. So for example, basically in 2016, when LinkedIn was hacked, your email addresses and your passwords were stolen, and sold on the black market. So a massive list of just usernames, passwords. And so if you use the same email address and password as you used on LinkedIn, but somewhere else, hackers could actually try to use that and have tried to use that to gain entry to those systems. So for instance, if your username is bob@domain.com and your password is apples on LinkedIn, and you use that password, or also a very similar variation where it's apples with a exclamation point or something on a different websites, hackers could easily try to log in and gain access to your other accounts. So obviously, as you can imagine, that's quite concerning. Now, a more important thing about this is also kind of understanding, have you been compromised? And there's two great websites to do this. And obviously, you're probably thinking at the moment right now something along the lines of, oh shit, which is good. That means you're starting to kind of understand the seriousness of this. Unfortunately, these two sites, Scattered Secrets and Have I Been Pwned, are there to help you do this. So I did not, well, according to Have I Been Pwned, my account has been compromised in, if you see there, 8 data breaches. So some of those were in 2016. There's something called the Anti-Public Combo List. In 2019, Canva, which is a popular kind of quick method of making social media graphics. That was breached in 2019. And 2016, obviously, as I mentioned, LinkedIn was breached. And in 2012, Last.fm was breached. And in those breaches, passwords and usernames were stolen. So this provides you a way of understanding how you've already been compromised. And I won't show you Scattered Secrets because they actually they do show your password in their list of showing where you've been compromised. So I'm not going to show you some of the passwords I've been using, but rest assured, all the passwords have already been changed a long time ago. But it is pretty scary, and to know that someone has access to them, and you can be presented with your actual password at that account. So I would suggest you maybe mark down these websites. You can see down there at the bottom, there's the URLs. Mark them down and take the time to go through them later just to double check if you have been pwned. Now, also, aside from understanding how you've been compromised potentially, it's also important to understand what makes a good password. Now, spriteCloud, on our hub, we have our password policy there, but I'd also like to explain a little bit about how this kind of works. And I'll be very brief. Cracking a password using brute force relies on random combinations of characters. The more complex and random your password is, the longer it'll take. So with that in mind, a good password should use a random combination of upper and lowercase letters and numbers, as well as symbols, and be at least 12 characters long. Now that's 12 characters, can change obviously depending on how important that account is. But as you see here on this graphic, if you only use numbers and you have it 12 characters long, it'll take, with the brute force strategy, around 25 seconds to crack that. But if you have 18 characters long and only numbers, it'll take 9 months. Now, as in you make it a bit more complex by using numbers, uppercase letters, and symbols, lowercase letters, as you see on the far right of the graphic. If you use 12 characters, that'll take approximately 34,000 years to crack it using brute force methods. So as you can see, there is a lot of benefits on making passwords complex and random. Another important idea to remember is that you should use passphrases over passwords. So it's actually not that weird if you think about it, because random numbers and random characters and symbols are kind of actually hard to remember, really hard to remember. But a phrase like brown monkeys eat yellow bananas, that's actually pretty easy. So a passphrase is easier to remember. It has a longer character count, and thus it is harder to guess. So for instance, if we only look at, let's see if I can have my pointer here. If we only look at lowercase letters even, and it's, say 12 characters long, which that passphrase I showed previously was longer than, it will take 3 weeks to crack. So even that is still a better approach than maybe some shorter passwords with random characters in some cases. Um, so that's something to bear in mind. Now, obviously, whole point of security, kind of there's a quote here: security at the expense of usability comes at the expense of security. So basically what that means is if your secure system isn't easy to use, people won't use it, thereby negating the security benefits of your system. So it's always a balancing act between what is the most secure, but it's also what is the easiest for people to use, because people won't use it if they don't like it. So passphrases are easier to remember than a string of characters, and it could be a good option for people that don't want to use password managers. We'll get into password managers a little bit later. But another tip, suggestion is don't mix personal and private. So don't use the same passwords for your professional and your private accounts. Don't mix professional and private is actually pretty good advice for many aspects of our lives. But in this case, it's definitely true when it comes to cybersecurity. What you do in your own time is up to you, but it would be a massive shame that if your private account was hacked, that it somehow gave access to your work accounts. So keep this in mind. But if you actually follow the next tip that we'll talk about for both private and professional life, this actually won't be a problem because the next step is to never reuse a password. So this goes along with kind of the understanding of what happens with credential stuffing, as you can see here worked out. Sure, using the same password over and over again makes your life easier, but it also means that one breach could jeopardize all your accounts. So in this case, you are definitely sacrificing the ease of usability for security. But as we show here, if you have the same username and accounts, password at a forum that gets hacked, and you use that across multiple services, then you could obviously be easily hacked in those ones. It's not even called hacked, being hacked. But so if you have the case where you use the same password in the same email addresses, and it does happen that it becomes hacked, then you have to very quickly change all those accounts to make sure and have a bit of peace of mind that you won't get hacked. So in this case, it's actually much easier and better to use unique passwords all the time. So you're probably thinking, how do I remember all the passwords when I can hardly remember what I ate for dinner last Tuesday? The answer is using a password manager. So there are several password managers out there, but basically what a password manager does is it makes it easy to use completely unique and actually strong passwords. So by strong password, that's multiple characters, numbers, and 12 or more characters. So to quickly use those and access your passwords and accounts when you need to. There are many password managers out there. Some are free, some are paid, but all are worth the actual minimal effort it does take to go through and set them up. I use LastPass, which you can see at the top right there. I have it on my mobile phone. I have it on my have it as a plugin on all my browsers. I typically use Chrome, but it also works for Edge, I believe Firefox, maybe even Opera. It works on most major browsers. But this basically allows me to quickly and securely access my passwords anywhere. And on my phone, it actually requires a biometric, so fingerprint scan every time I want to open it. So as you can see here on the bottom right, this is an example of the pop-up that would show up if I try to log in using my browser. So it would say, hey, we noticed that you have an account for Netflix. Would you like to log in using that? And it'll actually populate the fields for you, and you just click sign in. So it's super easy to use. And even if you don't have it and you have it on your mobile phone, you can quickly search for Netflix on your phone. It'll show you the username you've used to log into it, and you can also see the password or copy the password for quick and easy use. And also, probably one of the better tips for in the future is using two-factor authentication. Now, two-factor authentication is great because it requires you to have another device or account to verify who you really claim to be. This may be, for example, your mobile phone, maybe as an email or a text message sent to it, or use I have Google Authenticator, which has a list of stored things, which gives you a code that you can put in. It may be a bit overkill for your private social media streaming service accounts, whatever. But when it comes to important work accounts and important private accounts, like maybe bank accounts or anything with any credit card information, it's definitely worth the extra step of doing it. So if you don't have it, if you don't have the option for an important work account, maybe ask your boss or your manager and see if you can look into getting that turned on. But it's definitely a massively important tool. So hopefully, if you guys weren't already aware of these things, hopefully now you are, and you take the steps not only in your professional life, but also in your private life to understand that breaches do happen. The most important thing you can do is to add an extra level of security as in two-factor authentication for important things. But probably the most important thing is use a strong password and use unique passwords everywhere. So please take that on board. And if you have any questions, please ask.